And joining us now on the debate, Karen Stintz, Chair of the Toronto Transit Commission and City Councillor for Ward 16, Eglinton Lawrence. Denzel Minnan-Wong, Toronto City Councillor for Ward 34, Don Valley East. John Matheson, Principal at the government relations firm Strategy Corp. And John Lawrence, Toronto journalist who specializes in urban affairs. Want to let you know as well, our producers are hosting a live chat right now on our homepage. That's theagenda.tvo.org. So chime in on the live chat or send us a tweet at the hashtag #TheAgenda and join our conversation. Welcome, everybody. Nice to have you all back here in our studio. I'm going to advise you right now to get comfortable because we're going to go through some charts here because not everybody who watches us is from Toronto, and we want to give them all the background on what we're doing here. So, Michael, if you would, let's bring up how we got to where we are. Here's the saga of a transit plan. March 2007, the Toronto Transit Commission approves Transit City. That's a light rail transit plan. November the same year, the TTC approved 4 priority projects. They were Eglinton Crosstown LRT, Finch West LRT, Shepherd East LRT, Scarborough RT. Spring of 2009, Queen's Park announces more than $8 billion in funding for the 4 Transit City priority projects. And in December, construction begins on Shepherd Avenue's LRT. A few months later, April 2010, Rob Ford, running for mayor at that point, says he would scrap Transit City and, in the absence of full funding from the province, move to build subways instead. 1 month later, Metrolinx, which is the regional transit oversight body, submits revised plans for Transit City, cutting lines and stations, delaying completion of 3 of the 4 LRT lines, scrapping a light rail link to Pearson Airport. 5 months later, Rob Ford wins. He's the mayor of Toronto. He wins by a big margin. And within weeks, he tells the TTC to stop building Transit City. At the beginning of this year, Toronto City Councillor Joe Mihevc releases a legal opinion stating that Mayor Ford doesn't have the legal authority to unilaterally cancel Transit City. And so on February 8th, just earlier this month, City Council meets for an emergency session to debate the future of Transit City, a debate that is characterized as a fight between Mayor Rob Ford's subway-focused vision of transit and TTC Chair Karen Stintz's vision of transit, a plan that uses light rail transit as well as under-the-ground rail. And in a major rebuff to the mayor, Council votes 25-18 against him in favor of the Stintz plan. So, hang in there, almost done. 2 more things we want to show you. If you would, Michael, the next pictures. Here is Transit City. This was the original plan passed by the previous council, relies heavily on LRT. Everything in blue on this picture is theoretical. The rest exists, but that's what the plan looked like. Lots of rail all over the city. Then, continuing on, let's show one more picture here. This was, if I can call it this way, the Stintz plan, the new transit plan. Again, the blue lines are what she's hoping to build. 2 lines, one across Eglinton, another across Finch, the stuff in purple and blue and yellow and green. In purple and green and yellow is what's there. Finch is the busway, Eglinton is LRT. Everybody got that? I hope so. Here's the question. Denzel, you first. Transit City, then Rob Ford's plan, then Karen Stintz's plan.
Sorry, Steve, I don't want to interrupt, but I don't want it to be characterized as the Karen Stintz plan.
Okay, what do you want to call it?
Just, it's the council plan.
The council plan, right. It got the majority of votes at council, so it's the council plan. There are some who will look at this and say, this city doesn't know whether it's coming or going. Does it?
Look, I wouldn't fault anyone in the public for saying that there's this mass amount of confusion and this mass amount of frustration, and that people just want to move forward. But there is a problem here in that the mayor quite rightly ran on a platform of building underground transit. He believes he has a mandate, and when you talk to the public, especially when you talk to people in places like Scarborough, they actually are supportive of underground rail.
I'm going to come back to what the mayor's mandate was, but
Sure.
as far as you can see, to an outside observer, does this council look like it doesn't know it's, well, fill in the blank?
From an outside observer, from an inside observer, you could easily say that you know we've got our own congestion and gridlock, and we've got to unbundle this and move forward. So from that point of view, I share that level of frustration. We just don't want to move forward and have that frustration evolve into a plan that in the long term will not serve Toronto's needs.
Karen Stintz, how does all of this look to you?
Well, you know, again, the joke, Toronto spends a lot of time planning transit. We just haven't figured out how to actually build it. And so
It's not so funny, actually.
it's not so funny. So, you know, there was a discussion at council, do we spend all of the resources from the province on one line, essentially the Eglinton Crosstown, and with the replacement of the RT. And council came to the decision that no, there's other areas of the city that have need, and light rapid transit is intended to operate at grade. And so burying it takes a lot of resources away from other areas of the city. So let's think about a different way of spending those resources. So,
and that is the majority position today.
And that is the majority position
Except
today.
it's the third position. So does it look like this city is kind of...
No, it's actually not. It was really the going in position, which was Eglinton was always an LRT. There was, from back to 2007, it was always an LRT on Eglinton. That never changed. What changed was whether or not an LRT should be buried in a place where the road capacity was there that it didn't need to be. That was the decision that council wrestled with and came to a decision on. So, I mean, in fact, there is a lot of consistency in council's position throughout 2007. Every time council was asked to vote on light rapid transit, the majority voted in favor of it. And so what's left before us really is a question on Shepherd. And it's a difficult discussion because we have subways there. You know, certainly if we put some resources to extending the Shepherd subway to Victoria Park, it still doesn't meet the needs of Scarborough. I understand that. But the reality is we don't have the funds to do all the things we want to do. And at the same time, we're cutting bus routes.
So you got to make choices.
We have to make choices.
John Matheson, from your perspective, you've been watching this council operate for a couple of decades now.
Sure.
Does it look crazy to you?
Well, you know, I think, does it look crazy? No, it doesn't look crazy because I got way too much empathy for how difficult the choices are that they're trying to deal with to say anybody's crazy. They might be crazy to accept the responsibility of trying to make great choices, but what happens while they're doing it, I think, is pretty predictable. You know, one of the biggest challenges you have when you're trying to make choices like this is to figure out what criteria to use to evaluate success. I mean, the thing that leaps off the page these days is that there's a gulf between what people would like, which is more underground, and what we can afford. And you know, the efforts that different people have tried to figure out, you know, if the LRTs are characterized in the public as too expensive to be cheap and not good enough to be good, then lots of people have tried their hand at figuring out whether you should substitute some of them with BRT, bus rapid transit, because they really are cheap and they're really flexible, and then you can upgrade them later on. And are there any subways that you can afford to do? And you know, the exploration to try and figure out if they were financeable is something which, you know, isn't entirely finished yet, but I can't say anybody's really, that I know, is really optimistic that it's going to work out exactly in the fashion that the mayor had hoped. And there were a lot of people who were pretty questionable as to whether it would ever work out in that fashion. So I mean, there's a lot of reasons to say the investigation into whether you could get more underground was a good thing to do, but whether council now has to, when it has the right information in front of it, move on is anybody's guess.
John Lawrence, how does this council look to you?
Well, it looks wrought. I mean, they're trying to grapple with a difficult question, and from where I sit, the problem with the whole discussion about subways is that we haven't really had an honest debate about what constitutes a viable subway proposal, right? So you have to talk about the full cost. What are the citizens of Toronto, what are they willing to pay to have that subway service? What's the impact on the long-term operating costs? I mean, these are all complicated questions. So the mayor said, well, people want subways. That's true. I came here by subway. Probably the rest of them did too.
We hear it rumbling through the studio through
We
much
could hear
of the show.
it rumbling. It's a good way of getting around the city. But you know, if you say, okay, well, we want subways, then we have to, the next question is, well, what are we prepared to pay for them? And so we haven't had that full discussion yet. And I think that, you know, the way we talk about transportation now is that we can't afford this and that. And the default position, which is not a bad idea given the low density of the suburbs, is the LRT scheme. The other thing that I'd add is that I think that if the City of Toronto was spending its own money as opposed to the province's money, they would never have undertaken, there would never have been any discussion about burying Eglinton from stem to stern, because it's just too expensive in relation to what you get, what kind of benefit you get after the fact. And so so the whole debate is compounded, it's made more complicated by the fact that you have one group of politicians trying to make a decision about what the taxes raised by another group of politicians.
I want to go back to something and follow up on what Denzel said at the beginning, and Karen, I'll go to you first on this. When Mayor Ford got elected, he did interpret that victory as a mandate to build subways, putting rapid transit underground. Did you infer the same thing?
Well, you know, again, when if you go back to the YouTube video that was on the campaign page for the mayor, it was my understanding it was quite specific to Shepherd. And so I understood that in an attempt to reach out to Scarborough, who felt as if they had half a subway and not a full subway, that there was some campaign promise and campaign reach out to that community. And you know, when the decision was made to underground the LRT for the Eglinton, you know, I think it was a decision that was made on the principle that new transit should be not at surface but underground, without the full realization that you don't need to bury an LRT, and in fact, when you choose LRT, it's because it shouldn't be buried. And so as we worked through all those issues, different decisions were made. And so it is complicated when you take a principal position that nothing should be at grade, and then you try to work through the details when you have vehicles that are designed to operate at grade, then you arrive at some different conclusions.
What did you think of the mayor's opinion that I have a mandate to bury transit in this city?
So I think the mayor was fairly clear during the election that he wanted to build transit underground. Back in 2003 with the election of David Miller, there was this thing that was developed and accepted called the mayor's mandate. Now, not legislated, but accepted convention, both in 2003 and 2007. The left, as it were, you know, they were repeating this whenever they could, whatever the mayor said he was going to do during the election. That was the mayor's mandate, and the public service also adopted that as convention. And so,
but he also had the votes on council for it, didn't he?
He did.
Well, that matters, doesn't it?
Well, actually, you know, of course it does. But there is this idea adopted by the public service and accepted by many politicians who are actually now recanting on that idea of the mayor's mandate, who apparently believe that he doesn't have a mandate. So apparently, this idea of a mayor's mandate, it depends on who's in the chair.
Well, but presumably the mayor only has a mandate when he's got, was it 23 votes? Then he's got a mandate.
But the mayor also has the moral authority, I think, because he was elected by the entire city.
He's got one vote.
Of course, but that's legislative. I'm talking he has the moral authority because he was elected by the entire city. He has a little bit more authority, I think, and most people would accept, than just merely one vote.
Does he have moral authority beyond the one vote that he actually can exercise at council?
Well, so the analogy that I choose is Obama promising health care during the last presidential election. This was his mandate. He got a mandate to deliver health care to the American public. And then he had to put forward a proposal that was fought over at great length until they finally came up with a deal. And so
He could promise it, but Congress had to actually pass it.
Right. So having a mandate it's half the journey, and the rest of the journey is taking that mandate and saying, here's a plan, a solid, workable, financially realistic plan, and then putting that forward to council for approval. And the second part of the story is the part that we haven't gotten yet. The other thing I'd say about the mayor's mandate is that the mayor's mandate was sort of a dual message track there. One was subways. The other was the war on the car story, which is, and so you had the St. Clair right-of-way, you had this, other projects that were perceived to be impediments to the way people drive around the city. You could argue back and forth whether they are or not, but he had very strong feelings about taking away the things that impede drivers. So I think that a big part of his mandate was to get the LRTs off the road.
No, I get that. But John Matheson, just so we're clear, does the mayor's mandate mean, because I ran across the whole 416 and not in just one smaller constituency, that basically I can call the shots even if I don't have the majority of the votes at council?
Well, no, it doesn't mean that.
That seems to be what the Ford administration thinks.
Well, I think that what we have is something that's evolving. I think what the public expects is that the mayor is going to bring forward a platform that is implementable. And there's a lot of focus in our elections on I'm only going to make promises that I'm going to keep, and they're going to come with a fully costed fiscal plan so that you can have confidence that what I say I'll be able to follow up on. And I don't know how great our track record has been in a series of elections of late in actually delivering on that promise to the public. But I think the intention was to move to a stronger mayor system where somebody who ran with an implementable platform would then have the moral authority to command a majority of councillors, subject to them putting forward a detailed plan for actual implementation along the lines of Congress, like you were just describing,
Did you
John.
say command a majority of
Command a majority, like in the sense of using your moral authority to command a majority of council
Not
on
as
any
in
particular.
do what I say.
No, but in the sense of command it, in the sense of be able to deliver it. You don't always have to have the same people, but what you have to be able to do is generate sufficient authority that you can actually get to where you need to go because you have a plan that holds the confidence of the folks. And I think the problem is in the implementation detail, he's having the folks delaminate away from his coalition because, not because his plan has been 100% proven to not work, but because he hasn't proven it sufficiently that it does work on the matter of transit.
Okay, I want to remind everybody we've got a live chat going, so if you want to chime in on this, theagenda.tvo.org is our website, or you can fire off a tweet as well at Twitter. Our hashtag is theagenda. Karen Stintz, did you have a meeting with the mayor, private meeting recently?
Yeah, yesterday we sat down and talked about a number of things.
How'd that go?
It was fine.
Just fine?
It was good.
Pleasant?
It was pleasant. We did. We talked about the composition of the commission, and we arrived at a compromise that I think will get accepted by, to your point, that the council will be able to support.
Do you think he's compromising more these days?
Certainly he compromised on the composition of the commission. And I had said to the mayor, to the point of the plan, what is the plan for Shepherd? Because we have a meeting coming up on the 15th where we have an advisory committee that will input into council, provide some summaries and some conclusions. And if we're going to make a decision on it, we need to know what your plan looks like.
So he doesn't want to fire you as chair of the TDC anymore?
We didn't talk about that.
That's why it was a
We
pleasant
agreed
meeting.
to move forward. We're moving forward.
Okay. Help me with this, Denzel, because if you'd taken a vote, my hunch, I don't know. My hunch is if you'd taken a vote in December 2010, right after Rob Ford became mayor, he could have got anything he wanted through that council. He was at the height of his persuasiveness, of his commanding, if I can use the John Matheson term there. And yet, earlier this month, he basically has a vote on something that's near and dear to his heart and gets thumped. What changed?
Well, I think a whole number of things changed. Firstly, there have been a number of missteps that if you were to have the choice to do them all over again, the mayor probably would. But
like what?
Well, I don't think it was his finest hour on the waterfront file, and he
the
did
Ferris wheel and all that stuff.
Yeah, but there are a number of other things that occurred over that time, and what I think the mayor has decided to do is, unlike previous mayors, he's actually decided, many mayors in the past have looked at difficult files and they've pushed them away because they didn't want to deal with them, and they thought, you know what, hopefully if I push it over to the side, it'll disappear. So what the mayor said, and this is what he was elected on, you know what, I've got this in front of me, I'm going to do something about it. And they were difficult decisions: the core service review, program reviews, user fee reviews, tough budget, union contracts, okay? Contracting out garbage, okay? All of them exceedingly difficult decisions. And when you take those decisions to council, they're going to, by their very definition, involve controversy. And each time, because you take those decisions through, you're going to suffer some setbacks.
Some currency devaluation.
Yeah, you're going to lose some of your,
that way?
you're going to lose some of your currency. And what this mayor, I think, wants to do, and what you hear often from politicians, is if you want to be successful and you want to seek re-election, you do all the difficult, and you make all the difficult decisions at the front end of your term, because if you wait too long, you get into the re-election cycle, and you can't do that.
Let me follow up on that with you, John Lawrence, and that is we've heard the Ford brothers, and for those who live outside Toronto, the mayor is the mayor, and his brother's a member of City Council as well, Rob and Doug. They've said that they've basically guaranteed Rob Ford's re-election as mayor by going to bat for subways in Scarborough, because the formula for getting elected as mayor of Toronto these days is to unite the sort of what they call inner suburbs against the old sort of core of the city. And that by standing up for Scarborough, he's got the formula right. Is he right?
I think 2014 is a very long way away. 5 months ago, we wouldn't imagine that we were in the situation that we are in today. So I'm not really sure what the configuration is going to look like in 2014. The former mayor, David Miller, he had backing in Scarborough. He had some backing in North York. So he had a mostly downtown, but supported by some suburban councillor kind of coalition. Mel Lastman had downtown councillors in his camp for a while, certainly in the first term. So, I'm not really convinced.
Yeah, you know what? My recollection is that Mel Lastman did okay in the old city, but right. Great in the inner suburbs.
Right.
And that's the Ford formula. Isn't that, John Matheson? I mean, going forward, that's the formula for 2014, isn't it? And if it is, hasn't Rob Ford helped himself a lot for 2014?
Yeah, but results matter an awful lot, and I think people would want to see whether many of the positive things that Denzel was just discussing, I mean, the positive moves on the budget and some of the labor negotiations, whether those are the things that are most salient in people's minds, and whether they've actually made some forward progress on the transit file. If all there is a lot of deadlock for the next 3 years, I'm not sure that I would want to take that record, whatever my coalition was, back to my people, because I think people might say, listen, if you're a recipe for deadlock, you're still not going to guess what we want to go. So I think the notion that just by standing up boldly on this issue that he's somehow reassured, I wouldn't want to bet my salary on that one.
Okay, but having said that, Karen, he did say the other day, this is the formula. And he's sticking up for subways in Scarborough. He says if they're good enough for the inner city, they're good enough for the people in Scarborough. And he feels he's now solidified his chances to become mayor again in 2014. You prepared to say he's wrong?
Well, I would go back to some of the other mandates that he got from the people that I think are more broad-based, which is to keep our taxes low, to keep spending under control, to wrestle with the budget. And so I would, I think there's a lot of currency there still for Rob Ford and that kind of message, and I think that kind of message is actually more effective in getting him reelected in 2014.
Does this, at the end of the day, come down to a kind of inner suburbs versus the core fight?
Well, I'm kind of with John on this one. 2014 is a long way off, and
they're thinking about it.
And I'll take a vote if I were the mayor. I was, as an elected official, I'd take a vote in the south, or the north, or the east, or the west. I'll take a vote wherever I can get it. But what I can tell you from the people that I talk with in Scarborough, they are quite, they're very strongly supportive of the mayor, and they believe that to do anything but have underground transit, that they're being treated as second-class citizens.
So,
and I think that will be, for many, if an election were held today, that would be a ballot question for many of them. That would be the decider in how they would cast their vote.
So the guy who promised subways gets my vote, as opposed to the person who was happy to put it on surface.
He's sticking up for Scarborough. He's sticking up for the suburbs, and he's speaking to his core. The people that elected him expected him to keep taxes down and to reduce the cost and size of government, but also the people in the suburbs. In the last administration, they felt disenfranchised, that they weren't being listened to. And he is from Etobicoke. He does speak their language about efficient government and providing quality services, and this just reinforces that.
But I guess to get that subway on Eglinton, the people who live up at Finch get nothing.
You know what? It is a challenge. They may not get it. They may not get anything immediately, but the reality is, and even if you look at the original Transit City plan, that wasn't funded. I mean, the Don Mills line, the line in the West End, those weren't funded either. And so this arrangement where you're saying that they'll never get anything, that's based on what I think is the unreasonable proposition that money would never ever come from the other levels of government, and it may not be available immediately, but I think it would be reasonable to say sometime in the future there might be some funds available.
Just for argument's sake, Karen, let me invite you to offer an alternative explanation for all of what has gone on over the past year and a half or so, which is, it's often said that making decisions in public, doing democracy in public, is kind of a messy business. And you guys have been involved in some pretty messy business right now. But do you have confidence that at the end of the day, all of this actually is going to lead to something positive? And if you do, where does that come from?
Yeah, certainly these are, transit issues, as I'm learning, are very emotional to many people who rely on it. I mean, everybody relies on a transit system that's effective, whether you take the transit or you have a business that requires your employees to get there, whether you have a car. And so I think that these are decisions that we are making that are going to impact the city for years to come, and we treat them very seriously. And it is a messy business. I think once we make the decision and the province comes to its own conclusion around the council position, then we will be able to move forward. And my hope is that we will be able to move forward in some kind of united way, because the last thing, I don't think we serve the city well when there's a big divide.
So united means what?
That we...
You're not going to have a unanimous vote, obviously.
No, we wouldn't have a unanimous vote, but that we can at least agree on what the council position is and move forward.
Okay, you know, it's messy, but is this what democracy looks like?
Well, there's two parts to your question. There's the democracy part, which is what does the voter expect they get in return when they give somebody a mandate to go deliver it? And we kind of kick that around. But there's the other part, which is how does decision making work in a city council? And one of the biggest things about city council, unlike, say, watching the province try and deal with something that's difficult, is they get the luxury of doing everything in secret.
The province does.
The province does. I mean, I've done plenty of difficult meetings in ministry briefings or at cabinet meetings at Queen's Park, which frankly aren't all that tidier than the sorts of things that these poor folks have to do in public. The difference is it doesn't get seen in public until after a decision's been made and a communication strategy's been wrapped around it. And so the act of making some of these difficult public policy choices in public among people who frankly never said they agreed with each other until they were put around the council table together doesn't strike me as being an easy task to have look tidy as well as lead to a positive result. And so I'm kind of with Karen and Denzel in that I think there's lots of things that this council is doing well. I think the thing that's hardest, that has the highest degree of difficulty for them to do, is actually make up vision for the future and figure out how to fund it when it's not obviously funded. If you look at the easier stuff they do, like look after their core business, tighten the budget, improve the labor agreements and that sort of thing, improve their management of things like the outsourcing of garbage, they're good at that, and they don't do that badly at all. This other stuff where you say, here's a clean sheet of paper, there's all sorts of places and all sorts of modes and ways of raising the money, some of which involve increased charges on the taxpayer, some of which don't, that's hard. And unfortunately, they don't have a high enough degree of consensus or a clear enough vision or a clear enough set of implementation tools to be able to command a consensus around how to move forward.
So, all right, so John,
so that's
Lawrence,
why it looks.
That's why it looks the way it looks. Yeah. Help me on this then, John. As far as I can remember back, I think almost all the mayors of this city, in my lifetime here certainly, had a majority of people on council who, you know, they could consider to be allies and get their program through. I don't know if that's the case on this council anymore. So how do you work as a council? How do you go forward when the mayor can't get through what the mayor wants to get through?
Well, I think that it's the will of council. Council is a collective decision-making body. It's not, he's got one vote. He's got a citywide mandate, totally true. He's got a certain amount of moral authority, but at the end of the day, they have to make a decision as a collective body. And so to me, that just screams compromise, right? That you have to find ways of having the different factions find a compromise position. And this council actually did that very successfully with the waterfront deal. They had a unanimous decision. There were representative councillors from both sides. They hammered out a deal. And what I was looking for was something like that, where where council could get behind a position. And I think that the mayor has to answer for why he's not done that. He is absolutely true. People. What he says, that people want subways, but he has to demonstrate how he can deliver that. And in the absence of a convincing argument, he has to say, okay, well, what else? What are the compromise positions? When I was at the February 8th council meeting, I heard compromise positions thrown out.
By whom?
Well, by Councillor Stintz and by some of the others on that side, and talking about maybe there's some viability on the Shepherd, extending the Shepherd line for a couple of stops. But the fact of the matter is that money has been there, allocated for 2 years now. We're still not doing anything with it, except we bought a boring machine. So we have to move forward.
So let me get the two city councilors' views on this then. Denzel, what do you do when, I mean, the mayor has many, people have observed that this mayor has many good qualities. You've talked about them on the program already today, but compromise hasn't been high on the list. At least most people don't look at Mayor Ford and think, wow, there's a guy who knows how to compromise. In which case, he's 14 months into a 4-year term. What does that portend?
Well, I think that there are a number of things about the mayor that some of his good qualities that also have some issues associated with them. But he does understand what the people that elected him want, and he has an unbelievable focus toward keeping the promises that he believes that he made, which I think is a really good quality. But that gets, you know, that could actually butt up against this idea of trying to make a deal. And so when he makes a promise, he's going to keep it no matter what. And that's a great...
Well, but you got to have votes to keep promises.
No, I understand that. But he made a promise on contracting out garbage. He made a promise about making government more efficient. He made a promise about repealing the motor vehicle tax.
But he got votes to do all that.
No,
What do you do when you don't have the votes?
No, so that's an interesting problem, and I think what you see is the mayor bending a little bit. And so he's got to adapt to the shifting situation, and you know the other aspect that has to be considered as well is since he's done he's made many of the difficult decisions now and dealt with many of the difficult files, there won't be hopefully as many challenging files going forward. I mean, you're not going to have to, for example, negotiate another labor agreement until after 2014. We're going to deal with 79. In terms of contracting out garbage, another difficult file. Those difficult files, they're behind this government.
There'll be more, though.
But you know, all the things in terms of the mandate, many of them have already been achieved, and so you can move forward on some of the more positive things we can do. Now that the money is available, more money is available, you can spend that money doing city building, and that's not going to be as controversial.
Okay. Well, Karen, let me get you on this. If the mayor doesn't have the majority of the votes going forward on some of the big ticket items that he cares about, and compromise is not known as one of his better qualities, what does that portend?
Well, you know, as Denzel mentioned, it's a difficult situation because, you know, council doesn't want to be obstructing the mayor's agenda. I think that's not a good dynamic for the city. You know, on the other hand, I mean, if there's compromise on both ends, that changes things, but it's hard to compromise with someone who's not moving. And the difficulty we find ourselves in with delivering a subway to Shepherd and to Scarborough is that we don't know how we're going to pay for it, which remains a significant obstacle in terms of supporting that mandate.
So you don't see compromise on his part yet?
Well, it's difficult because I don't know what compromise looks like when we just can't afford to do something. And so what we have now is a difficult problem. And so if we have a question of, with the limited dollars we have, what are we going to do? Because none of it's going to take us to, none of it is going to deliver a subway to Scarborough. And so until somebody acknowledges that, it's difficult to come up with a compromise.
Can you see Mayor Ford acknowledging that?
Well, I think that the mayor is looking at, and the mayor's office is looking at options for providing the necessary funding. He's meeting with individuals. Gordon Chong has done some work on this, so you know that is moving forward. There's no answer in, you know, today, but they're trying to develop an answer that could be acceptable to council.
You know, whenever these kinds of situations arise, people start having conversations about whether or not we need to do some kind of major municipal rethink. And John Matheson, one of the things you hear all the time is, do we need to go to a system like they have in many big American cities, where the mayor, having been elected citywide, has a real mandate, you know, has almost presidential powers to veto decisions that councils make. Real power comes with the job, not just one vote. Do we need that here?
Well, the answer I'd give you is this. You design the system in its form so that it can deliver the function that you need it to be able to provide, right? And city councils are designed to be stability machines. They put a high focus on inclusion. There isn't a government and an opposition, at least there's not supposed to be. Everybody's got a seat at the table, and it's done in transparent fashion. And so frankly, it's not all that effective. You don't have a strong leader, you don't have a minister who's responsible for something with a bureaucracy that is personally accountable to that minister and a minister accountable for delivering. You don't have those tools which frankly are to some degree less touch-tone accountable They are less inclusive. You know, if your member is elected and is in opposition benches for 4 years, they're not part of the government. You got to wait for 4 years until your representative is part of it. We don't have that. So if you move to a system where you have more like a government than a council, you will have a more robust tool for getting difficult stuff done. And as I already argued, I think doing a major transit strategy, or arguably a major waterfront strategy, these are sort of, I'm going to make a policy, I'm going to make a vision, I'm going to figure out how to fund it, I'm going to get it done. That's Fred Gardner stuff. That's Robert Moses Parkway stuff, right? What we've got is a system that was designed for David Crombie and fairy dust, and we'll do what we did plus 1.6% last year. And when we get to these more visionary things, they're harder. So what you'd have to ask yourself is, are we in a permanent state with a city the size it is, with a mayor who's got such a big responsibility, sixth biggest budget and all that, that it's a steady state that we are going to require that kind of robust capacity to make difficult but necessary choices, or not?
John Lawrence, David Crombie, the aforementioned, always used to say, you don't need a strong mayor system, you just need a strong mayor. Yeah. He was. Do we have that today?
Well, we have a mayor who's very insistent on his position.
Not sure that's what Crombie meant.
But I agree. I think that he's shown that being overly insistent on a given position can have a lot of blowback, and that's what he's encountered. And what I'd say about the strong mayor system is you can look back at Montreal in the 60s, where they went terrifically in debt to build a huge subway system and then to host the Olympics, because they had a very authoritarian mayor. And so they spent a generation digging themselves out of that hole. So I would rather, for my money, have acknowledging the point that you make, right, that there are these very difficult, very complicated problems that the City of Toronto's tax base is not designed to deal with. But I would rather have sort of a more consensus-based decision-making approach, because the city is very diverse. It's complicated. It can't be reduced to the will of one person, in my view. And so, maybe they don't do things as efficiently as possible.
Karen?
Well, and just I think also we have to acknowledge the things that you're talking about, like vision for transit, vision for the waterfront, those types of longer-term strategies. They're not one-term decisions. Mm-hmm. And so at some point we need to figure out as a city, how do we actually agree that we've made a decision, right? Mm-hmm. Because we did actually have a plan, it was fully funded, and a mayor was elected who didn't agree with that plan, and for reasons that are legitimate. But now we found ourselves 2 years doing nothing, and again facing difficult decisions in council where there's this appearance of opposition, and I don't think it's very difficult to break through that. But
would a strong mayor system have changed any of that?
I don't know. And we set up, we've set up various bodies to help us. We have the Waterfront Corporation that was going to help us contain the vision while we worked through all these other issues. We set up Metrolinx that notionally could help us hold the vision while we worked out some of the details of the environmental assessments. But yet we still haven't found a way to hold on to a vision that survives an election. And that's the challenge that we face ourselves.
That happens at the province too, though.
Yeah.
Bob Ray, when he was premier, built tunnels. John, you might remember Mike Harris filled them all in when he got elected. So these things do happen. Would a strong mayor system make any difference here?
I think a strong mayor system could make a difference if you look at some of the models that are being used in the United States.
As long as you get to be the strong mayor?
Well, this is the thing. Whoever's who's ever in the chair, that will influence the council's decision on where they would stand. Although I believe actually there needs to be a more proper codification on what the role the mayor has, and I think there needs to be a codification about what his relationship is to the public service. Apparently, a lot of people feel that the mayor can't have a position on the chief general manager of the TTC. Yet, when an election rolls around, he is the person whose credibility is on the line on transit issues. And so there's a disconnect there about being accountable for transit, but not being able to have a say on transit policy and operations. And so we haven't had a codification of the mayor's responsibilities. A lot of it was done in 2003, and it was done by the public service by just sort of this acceptance, right? And this is where you have these legal opinions flying back and forth in the mayor's mandate. I think clarity and accountability and some sort of legislative initiative where we actually do know what his powers are would make it a lot easier for council, but it also would make it a lot easier for the public to judge the mayor and the council at the end of 4 years.
Okay, that's our time because I got to save some time for Mr. Metrolinx.
Sure.
So let me thank everybody for coming out for our discussion today. Karen Stintz, the Toronto City Councillor from Eglinton Lawrence, Denzel Minnan-Wong, the Toronto City Councillor from Don Valley East, John Lawrence, the writer, John Matheson, the principal at Strategy Corp. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.